Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Today I'm joined by Lily Guinn, who is a software developer at Newcastle Building Society. Lily isn't the typical sort of guest that we have on the podcast. She's not a business owner, she's not a business leader, she's not a regional figure, but she is undoubtedly somebody who is fearless. If you ever want an example of somebody who has overcome so much and has demonstrated the values of fearlessness, then listen to this podcast. Hi Lily, and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We met first off when you were nominated as sort of one to watch at the Northern Power Women Awards, which is probably over a year ago now, is it? Or was it the start of this year?
Start of this year.
Yeah. How did that feel to be nominated for an award like that?
A bit overwhelming because I think that a lot of the stuff that has happened in the past has been quite internal to my organisation at Newcastle Building Society, and it's always a very validating thing when I'm kind of recognised amongst women, and I think that amongst Northern Power that was quite a new thing. I don't think it's something that they've really done before, and I remember during the sort of nomination process that because I was asked to kind of write a summary of the things that I had done within NBS, and I did it, but I didn't really expect much. It could go one or two ways, you know. But no, it was an amazing feeling. And
it's such an enormous event, isn't it? It's quite overwhelming. It's quite overwhelming.
Yeah. It was one of those things where events like that, I always kind of feel like I didn't really make the most of it because I didn't talk to that many people. I was just kind of there and in that moment, but in the same time, it's like giving me a lot of experiences that I never would have got. I'm always happy to have an excuse to dress up because I don't get many.
You mentioned the Newcastle Building Society, and your day job. You are a software developer for NBS. I mean, people think software development in banking. What's that about? So you just tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah. So previously, my role, because my role's changed very recently. My role for the first 3 years was I was a mobile app developer. So just think your typical banking apps. That's the stuff that I was working on. I could go into a whole technical spiel about what it was that specifically I was doing, but imagine like a kind of technical rewrite of the app.
Right, okay.
Because some of the technology was out of date. That was my role for the last year or so. And now I've moved on to doing more what's called API work, which is basically imagine how one bit of data goes from A to B. Like just imagining the when you make a transaction, what journey is it going on? That sort of thing is what I work on now, and I love that. I love mapping things out. So,
well, yeah, and you've explained that in a very relatable way. Because sometimes, for non-techies, I mean, I'm a tech lawyer, so I've worked in tech a lot, but still can get blinded by science very, very, very easily. But you can explain it in a very, very relatable way, which is good. So how did you end up at Newcastle Building Society? What was your sort of did you do a technology degree? Or?
Yeah. So I actually had a spotty background with education because the first thing is that I went to a 3-tier school, which is not normal for most people, lower, middle, upper. But I failed sixth form and got kicked out, and then I moved over to my dad and did a college course. And then from there, went and did a uni course. After that, I did my degree in Westminster it was kind of diet computer science because it was multimedia computing, which then they changed its name to digital media development. The reason I went for that degree was actually because I felt intimidated that I was not smart enough to do computer science, which after doing the degree, I realized was a load of rubbish. But I was just when you do programming, you often end up Googling a lot of things to learn about different types of solutions, what technology is available to you to solve a problem. And you sort of see people arguing about what the best solution to a problem is. And you sort of imagine, well, if I submitted this, a bunch of people would tell me off. And it makes you think that it's going to be this elitist, really competitive environment. And it can throw you off, but it's not really like that. The only times you really get that experience, I think, is with yourself, with this kind of continuous self-improvement or trying to get better at it. But it's not really. I think at least the culture in NBS is we're very specific of avoiding blame culture, right? And that also means that if some code doesn't act the way that you would expect it to, that it's about trying to improve the code rather than blame the person.
Yeah.
And those sorts, it's a bit of a tangent to go on, but like those sorts of fears like really influenced the degree choice I made. And I know that that's the experience that a lot of people have, where they feel like they just can't jump into that. But yeah, from there, going over to Newcastle, I just wanted a fresh start. Transitioning because I started transitioning during uni, but I didn't move out. I was living with my dad still. So being around my family while transitioning didn't give me the freedom to really reinvent or like rediscover myself. So getting that freedom to just move away and be completely separated for a while gave me the opportunity to experiment and try new things. And so I ended up just looking for roles in Newcastle and found NBS, and it was a good match. And yeah,
good. Well, that's good. And you mentioned there, obviously, that you transitioned. So people listening to this might not understand what that means.
Yeah,
might be the first time they've heard somebody talk about transitioning, or they might have heard some very negative things about it.
Oh yeah.
Probably will have done.
Yeah.
So how would you articulate to somebody who doesn't know anything about being transitioning? How would you articulate to somebody what it's about, as somebody who's been through it and has that lived experience?
It's difficult to really come up with a kind of definitive way of explaining the trans experience, because it's not a binary experience, right? Everyone has their own sort of experience with gender, and it's a very kind of Western idea to prescribe one definition of gender onto the whole of society. Like fluid experiences with gender have existed throughout history, throughout biology, and throughout different cultures. It's a very new thing to be like, there's just male and there's just female. But like for myself, it came from a sort of sense of just outright distress going through puberty, where I was going through this sort of, I remember that at the time when I hadn't came out to myself, I thought that my fear was not over gender, but it was over aging, because I would see my dad and I'd see what his hand looked like, for example, and how it was kind of big and cracked, and I just thought, that's what my hand's going to turn into. Like, even when I was like 17 or something like that and gone through like most of my growth, I was like, I'm going to transform even more. And like, I thought it was just a fear of getting old. But what I realized was that I just didn't want to transform into a man, and that it was already distressing. I was already asking questions to like my mum and stuff like that about when changes were happening throughout puberty, and they were going in a direction that I just didn't understand or didn't want. And so for me, transitioning was about my war with testosterone. It was trying to escape away from it, trying to escape from this thing that was causing permanent damage to my identity and to how I saw myself, and trying to reverse that damage. So I think that what ends up happening is you end up kind of latching on to definitions and latching on to understandings that are thrown your way. So when I discovered what trans women were when I was about 18, that's what I kind of latched onto, especially when I realized what was actually, because I had always seen it as cross-dressers, but that's not what it is. And then you also get the kind of misrepresentations, like I think famously with South Park, they showed that one episode of like one of the characters getting surgery and then it's done. Not how it works, not even remotely. Then people also have misrepresentations about like what the results are going to be. And this was also at a time of culture war as well, like because this would have been around 2016, where there was a kind of trans, anti-feminist movement, especially online, which is where I would have spent the majority of my time. It wasn't until like a few years later, because I had got caught into that as well, because I grew up in it, and I had to kind of deprogram all of that. I've kind of rambled a long way away from the point of what transitioning is, but essentially just trying to come at peace with yourself, and whether that can be different for different people. It can involve medical transition, it can involve social transition. For myself, actually, it was more of a social thing. So I've always just described this to people when I picked the surgeries I had. It was not about whether or not I felt that I need to remove this or that. It was about what's going to make people acknowledge me as a woman, what's going to make people treat me like not as a man, and what and I didn't really care about things that people couldn't see. It wasn't a priority to me. But that's not the same for everyone. Some people are in massive distress over not being able to get pregnant, for example, or not being able to have things that they would define themselves as a woman experience. It's just, there's so much variation, and it's so personal and so difficult to define, that I think that no one can ever really speak to the whole experience of it, you know?
Yeah, well, it's personal, isn't it? It's like everything that everybody goes through in life. You could go through exactly the same thing, but it will be a different experience for you. And it's, you know, when it goes to the core of your identity and who you are, even more so, because it's nuanced, isn't it? Yeah. And I completely agree. I don't think this is a binary world. I think there's a spectrum of all sorts of things. Yeah. And that is backed up by the science, the social science, all of those sorts of things. But that's not an easy road to take for your life. No. And this is what always, you know, it's not a choice, or is it a choice? What?
There are different camps on that. So like there are some people who like to go on the idea of born in the wrong body type thing, trapped in a woman's body type thing. I think that that's often a simplification that's used for the benefit of cisgender people rather than being what the actual experience can be like. There's a growing movement of people saying that it almost is a choice, but like that's okay. There are some people who don't want to like listen to that idea because it's conceding ground to transphobes type thing. I don't really know where I sit with that. I think that essentially is stuff that goes into gender theory, and as much as I would love to spend more time reading on it and understanding it, there are a lot of people who also like just believe in the abolition of gender, but that doesn't mean that they don't believe in transgender experiences, and they don't believe in like medically transitioning. It's just people should have the freedom to do these things, but like it shouldn't be locked behind certain definitions. I think that ultimately the things that we're discussing are social constructs, right? And we have to discuss whether or not, or decide whether or not the definitions of words really matter so much as to define the freedoms that people have. It's a difficult conversation, I think, that and one that's just filled with so much fear because people don't want to lose the rights that they have or lose the progress that they've made. Just by me acknowledging that there are some trans people who believe that gender is a choice, it's like, oh, are people going to take away my hormones for saying that? Like, I don't know. If it makes sense, it's almost like, is it the right question to be talking about type thing? Like, or is it just something that we do to help people understand, but we do it knowing that we're going to change the narrative later on once they do understand? Yeah,
it's become so polarised. You know, you mentioned the culture wars. Everything's become so polarised that there's very few instances now where people meet in the middle. And I think it's, you know, that's where real change can happen, where people can make that human connection in some way, understand each other's viewpoints, and then go on and say, well, actually, you know, maybe I wasn't right about that, or maybe there is a different approach, or maybe there's different ways of thinking about it and we'll never agree, but we can live harmoniously together.
It's difficult because like the idea of meeting in the middle inherently means that when it depends on what the discussion is going to be, right? So something that's often talked about with the idea of gender critical people discussing trans issues with trans people is that the stakes are completely different between both ends, and meeting in the middle is still a loss for trans people.
Yeah.
Because the gender critical people have nothing to lose from having that discussion. They might argue that they lose the right to discriminate against trans people in bathrooms, but I don't believe that that's any big loss. But when it comes to like the concessions that a trans person makes, it's like their own existence. They're acknowledging that they are even real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's being asked to compromise on something that's your core.
Yeah.
Compromise on it is very difficult. I think sometimes when people with very polarized views, and I use that word slightly uncomfortably because I think having a view on somebody else's identity as well is difficult for me personally. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But I think when people come together, I think that the more there's no discussion, it becomes more difficult to reach any sort of impasse or whatever it is with those people, and it just feels more and more polarized. So I'm just interested in whether or not you think it's worthwhile having discussions with people with vastly different views on something that is actually about somebody's identity.
It's something where I myself am willing to have the discussions, but that's because I've put so much time into being able to have those discussions. Being trans doesn't make you an expert, even though being trans often makes you forced to become an expert. Where like when I was early in my transition, I felt like I had to have research papers printed out ready in my backpack just in case anyone was going to start questioning me. Because I had that sort of experience of transitioning, I'm ready when someone's going to start bringing anti-trans points to me. And I'm also ready to educate. I'm fairly patient. I'm willing to actually, if someone has this sort of view, I'm willing to go, well, let's talk about that. It's difficult when it comes down to acknowledging or being sympathetic towards people who want to have a view that involves discriminating against another person. Like if you're going to, if your core view is not about your own identity, but about someone else's, and you're prescribing that onto someone, it's not something I'm going to have particularly much sympathy for, other than trying to help you deprogram that.
I think there's the people that tend to hold quite extreme views, phobic views around trans people, around Islamophobia, quite often have never had the opportunity to meet, to talk to. Oh yeah. And so those people, the people that they're talking about become dehumanized, and it doesn't matter. And you see time and time again, when there's actually human connection between people, they take a step back and go, oh, actually, this has an impact on a person who I now know, who I respect, who I like. Yeah. Perhaps there's a different way forward. You know, you're very calm. You're very well educated. You are very articulate. How do you maintain that level of just being able to deal with things in such a respectful and gentle way in the face of all of the horrendous abuse that you do get?
Well, there's a few different things to kind of draw on that. What in terms of directly answering your question there, how do I deal with it? Luckily, I have a partner who listens to my rants afterwards. Of course, I get angry, I get frustrated, I get that sort of pit in my stomach where I feel like it's all hopeless, where like it's out of my control. What can I even do? I had that recently where the recent announcements from the Good Law Project essentially meant that, to paraphrase it, that they've given up on trans cases because they don't feel like it can be won. And it makes you feel like, what can I do? It's hopeless. But when it comes to in the face of that sort of aggression, something that I've realized more and more is you can't convince people through arguments, because people hate being wrong. They hate being told they're wrong. They hate being shown they're wrong. They will just dig and dig and dig. And essentially, I don't think that it's the way to change people's views. My sort of approach to things is one, that you promote your existence through friendship. You're right that a lot of people don't, they sort of dehumanize, not intentionally, but they just don't see people as like I said this for my mum, right? Like my mum told me this, that she'd never really seen transgender people as people or humans before. And she didn't mean it in terms of like, oh, they're subhuman or something like that. It was like, I've only ever really seen them as a character on TV. They've only ever been this like concept. They've never been a person. And then when you start actually thinking about what their day-to-day life is, it really opens your eyes, right? Like her big one was like how I would schedule my life around shaving, because I couldn't shave every day because I'd start getting like dry skin and eczema, all that. So like you do it every couple of days and stuff like that. And then you just don't go out on those days when you're early transition, or at least in my experience, right? And she's thought about like thinking about those things completely changed her view on how transgender existence is. She couldn't just be like, oh, you just need to try harder, because it's not as simple as that, right? Her having that realization was just from talking to me. And a lot of people in my life had those realizations just from talking to me. There are going to be some people who are not willing to have that discussion, but if enough people are having that conversation, and that one person who's sticking their heels in, like ends up losing their friends over it because they're just seen as an unpleasant person, they sort of have to change their views just out of embarrassment. And that's kind of what I aim for, is like just making people who have these terrible views feel shame, and they will eventually. It's always just comes down to just like, rather than trying to out debate them, just be around them and exist.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful way to approach things. Just popping in to say, if you are enjoying the conversation so far and want to make sure you keep up to date with other episodes, then please hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Let's jump back into the conversation now. For people who are listening who haven't met a trans person before and have no understanding, and have perhaps only seen the newspaper headlines and that sort of stuff, I think people don't appreciate the level of hostility that you experience as a trans person on a daily basis is something off the scale.
Yeah, especially early transition.
Yeah,
because it's easier to identify. Although, like, then later transition, you get sort of new forms of discrimination, like discourse over dating apps and stuff like that. Like, people love to talk about the whole idea of disclosure and all that, which then leads to a whole bunch of transphobia being thrown your way, or people being predatory and all sorts there. But like, to give some examples of what my experiences can be like when I was in early transition, I had people throwing drinks at me. When I hadn't done or said anything, I'm just walking in the street. I've been milkshaked just as many times as Nigel Farage.
It's not really an accolade you want to hold.
No. And I've also had people say, like, they like to throw the suicide percentages at me. Like, I remember one person saying, like, I forget what the percentage is. I'm going to say 40%, because I think it's like 40% of attempted or something like that. And they said, when you're going to join the percentage and stuff like, or when you're going to become a stat and stuff like that. And it's like, just complete strangers. They hear my voice. They recognize that I'm trans. I've had taxi drivers actually also say some very off-color and weird things to me as recently as last year. You get all sorts of different kinds of aggressions and microaggressions. Like, I can't say, like, you get the little things where it's like, oh, are they really, like I was in the pub the other day and someone said, I'll let this lady through, and it's like, lady. And like, those are little things, they just kind of scratch at you. But then when people are outright like trying to be direct at you, like, it does weigh you down. But nothing wears me down more than being on testosterone. So like, I'll take it over not transitioning. Yeah, and I think that's what I always say to people who are gender critical. Do you really think that a trans person would choose to go through the physical stuff that you have to go through, and then get all of this abuse on a daily basis? What benefit does somebody get out of doing that
other than feeling comfortable, being themselves.
Well, they always love to put it down to either some form of sexual thing or some term of sports thing. It's usually one of those two. Like they usually just jump straight onto, they're doing it to exploit someone else.
I think the other misconception is that you can just like transition overnight. That's
Yeah.
you go to the doctor. They have this big thing about trans kids, and you just go to the doctor and they give them hormones, and then the next week they're in having an operation, and then everything's. It's an intensive and long process.
Of course, yeah.
And if you don't have access to cash, it's even more so. Can you get, so just for people who don't know, just give an outline of what process do you have to go through to transition?
Well, before I say what it's like for an adult, I'm going to say what it's like for a kid, because I think it's really important to dispel like what people think happens with trans kids. So ideally, like putting aside the way the NHS works right now and the way that private care works right now, the way that it should work is that you come out, you maybe have some form of counselling to assist you in just being able to articulate how you feel and stuff like that. You go on blockers, you don't go on hormones. So blockers are, the technical terms are anti-androgen. They're used to suppress hormones being produced by your body. So testosterone, estrogen, any sexual hormone is repressed. You don't replace that with estrogen during puberty. You wait until you're 16, 17, 18, and then you're ready to go through your desired puberty. The entire idea is to stop you from going through a puberty so until you are old enough to make a decision. That's what the design is. But people think that you're going straight on estrogen, straight on testosterone, and transitioning as an 8-year-old. Doesn't make sense. Like when they talk about like prepubescent kids, like they're not going through puberty anyway, so why would we then put them on a different one? And then when it comes to the teenage years, it is just giving them that time to mature. So you might go for a social transition, wear different clothes, go by a different name, all completely harmless. Like the only harm that comes from that is from being from in a discriminatory area, and we should be trying to tackle that rather than tackle the existence of the trans person. When it comes to surgeries, that's not happening until they're 18 either. It doesn't even make sense to do it medically. There's no reason to do it. Why would you do surgery on your face when your face isn't even fully formed? Why would you do surgery down there when it's not even fully formed? None of it makes sense. You wouldn't do that. So realistically speaking, that's not how it goes. Puberty blockers are banned at the moment. So they can't go through that.
Not for cis children, though.
Not for cis children, no. It's totally safe for cis children because that's the thing, is that blockers are actually designed to deal with hormone issues and cancer. But like when it comes to trans children, it's considered unsafe for no good reason other than culture wars, to just get votes or whatever. Currently, they're just put on the waiting list, and they have to wait until they're 18 so they can go on another waiting list. And then in 6 or 7 years, maybe they can start hormones. Because I started hormones through private care, but originally, I also applied for the NHS. I got my first appointment 5 years after, and I had to wait. My first appointment, and then I turned up, and they were like, "Oh, you're done." And I said, "Yes, I'm done." And the only thing I gained was that they took away my progesterone prescription, because NHS doesn't believe in progesterone, so I wasn't allowed to have that anymore. So yeah, all I got was it being slightly cheaper and less hormones. So that's great. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of the adult process, you go through a psychological assessment, which ideally we'd be getting rid of. Self-ID should be the way forward. And then you go through an endocrinologist appointment to sort of work out what you need with hormones, what prescription to put you on, where are you at right now, and go through a whole load of blood tests. And then you go forward, and those two appointments are usually 6 months apart as well. So I was pressured to change my name before my assessment and stuff like that. I didn't really do lived experience, but I did present in what they worded it as like neutrally, which was me trying to present feminine, but lived with my parents, so yeah. but yeah, it kind of gives you an idea of what that process looks like. That's putting aside surgeries and stuff like that, because I haven't done surgery through the NHS. I've done it all privately, and from there, that's kind of just at your own discretion. Yeah. Like, you still need to be on hormones a certain amount of time, at least a year. But like, realistically speaking, if you're saving up, then you're going to be on hormones for way longer than it takes to get all that done. And then, or even with private care, you're still looking at like a year waiting list to get your first appointment. So because
get your first appointment.
Yes, yes. So I think, because I did mine in 2018 and that was like 6 months. So I can't imagine it's got much better with the amount of hormones clinics shutting down. And
even if you transition as you've described, then you've got your gender isn't recognised legally until you get a gender recognition certificate.
Well, that one's a bit spotty because I'm not bothering with it.
Yeah.
Like I did try, but the paperwork is insane. But like, the way that impacts you as a trans woman currently is mainly to do with like death stuff and marriage stuff. But like, it's more important to get your passport done than to get a gender recognition certificate. People, especially gender critical people, love to like harp on the importance of the gender recognition certificate to say that you need to carry it around with you and stuff like that. No.
I think people think it's much broader, gender recognition, that it opens up a world of particularly women's toilets.
Yeah.
But actually, like you say, it's about legal recognition. So it's about what goes on your birth certificate, what goes on your death certificate, and what we are able to say when you get married.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
The gender recognition certificate. So I can understand why people don't choose to put themselves through an arduous process and a distressing process in order to get that. But I think a lot of cis people will think that having that is the magic bullet to everything, and it opens up a whole world of things where you can do things that should only be reserved for people who are cis women.
I mean, ultimately it comes down to, if I was going to get harassed for going into a toilet, would the certificate have made a difference? No. The time and money would have been spent, way better spent, even though it shouldn't be this way, on doing whatever treatment I need to do to continue to pass, than it would have been to go through some form of certification. So, yeah.
I mean, how important is people talk about passing, and how important is that to you? Is that?
I think a lot of it comes down to internalized transphobia too, in terms of when you do value passing, because you're like, I want to pass as a cis woman, I want to look like a cis woman, and like, I want to escape away from being recognized as a trans person, right? It's difficult because ultimately, like, I think that you kind of have to mentally separate the idea of passing from the idea of your goals of who you want to, or what you want to look like, because cis women have goals for what they want to look like as well. Sometimes like, some people it doesn't matter to them, but like a lot of people it does. And I think it's like, for myself, I tend to relate my goals more to just how any person is, rather than it being towards the idea of passing or not. It helps for myself that I consider the trans form to be beautiful. I love the way that trans women look, whether or not they're more masculine in presentation or feminine in presentation or anything in between or outside of that. I find that it's just amazing that people can sort of morph themselves into being who they want to be, and they have true freedom. I think that's just an amazing thing. And one of the most inspiring people I saw was, I forget who they are, because I just saw like advertisement for it, like a poster for it, but it was a podcast of this trans woman who just had like full-on stubble, but like fully presenting feminine otherwise, and it just looked so cute and comfortable. It was amazing. And that would not be considered to be passing, but like, it doesn't matter. I think the other thing that's a bit of a problem with the idea of passing is it does influence the way that cis people kind of view trans people. It's like, it's okay that you're trans only if you're trans on our terms. And I think the best example of that is it looking at the representation of trans people in the Daily Mail, because you actually see them celebrate trans people sometimes, but only if they're a model. Only if they are like, oh, this person transformed or transitioned, usually meaning that they transitioned as a kid or something like that, but like, they ignore that and say, oh, they look like this is what trans women should be. It's like, no, like, good for them that they look that way, but like that's not how it should be. Like there's no way to define how it should be. And then anyone who doesn't fit that beauty standard is like back to the old hate train.
It's the separation as well, isn't it, between your identity, and I think it's often confused between gender expression and gender identity. And
yes.
You hear people talking about somebody who has transitioned, say, well, you know, there was no indication. They weren't really like, you know, into girls' toys when they were little, and they you know, they weren't putting dresses on, and they weren't. And I've got a trans friend who says, well, if I had been born as a cis woman, I would have been a tomboy.
Yeah.
I like wearing jeans and t-shirts and football strips.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean I'm not a woman.
Yeah, there's plenty of tomboy women who are like, oh, if I grew up in this generation, I would have transitioned. I would have been transitioned into man forcibly. Like they're not actually.
Yeah.
But no, that's not how that works. Like it's very much you led. Like no one's forcing anyone to transition. And as we've said before, it's a very difficult process. So like, if it's not for you, you'll find out early. But like the idea of the way that you express yourself and the way that you do identity, it is completely separate. But also there's that kind of, when you're closeted, you're doing everything you can to make sure that no hints that you are trans come out, or that you are slightly feminine if you're raised a boy. Like for myself, I was basically just had no personality intentionally. I would make it so that I never displayed any liked anything. I never liked music, never like a particular football team, never like a particular whatever. Like I would just say no to everything, because I felt that if I said that I liked something, then people could categorize me, and then they might be able to find out that when I go to sleep, I think about being a woman. Like it's an insane thought process, but yeah, it's the way that you think when you're in the closet.
So it's really important that people hear this stuff, because it's the human impact of what it's like. So, I mean, you know, your honesty and your openness about your journey is just incredible. When you are faced with the animosity and the hostility that you have, what advice would you have for somebody who is questioning their identity at this point in time? What would you say to them?
Meet more people. Like be around trans people, because there's nothing more inspiring and there's nothing more freeing than being around people who will accept and understand you and give you that space and freedom to experiment and try new things. Even if it is that you're just saying to your friends, can you call me a different name for a while, see how it feels? When I was in my early transition, I had a friend who would let me keep the clothes I bought at their house so that I could experiment there without it being found at home. Because I used to get like my room inspected and stuff like that by my mum and stuff. So like they would have found it. And like, yeah, just surround yourself around those positive people who are going to look out for you and give you the freedom to try things out. And if it turns out that it's not the way, don't force yourself. You don't need, like, you've got all the time in the world to figure it out. All you'll regret is the time that you felt that you were forced that you couldn't. Like, it took me a good, from 12 till I finally accepted I was trans at 21. I didn't find out about trans people till I was 18, but I had the dream since I was 12. So like, let's say 9 years to come out to myself.
Yeah.
And could those years have been shorter if I was not going through discrimination and stuff like that? Sure. But like, it still would have took those first few years to like fully understand myself, and that's okay.
And we've talked about some quite heavy stuff today, and we've talked about some stuff, you know, a lot of things that sort of negative aspects of being trans, but there are some brilliant aspects too. So let's end on a positive.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about being trans and having transitioned?
Well, you're happier. Like you feel more like you've just become yourself. Like you feel like you can sort of rediscover all of the things that you didn't get to before. Like you just get to escape from that negativity. In terms of like, I also feel like it's given me a lot of traits in terms of overcoming adversity is always going to make you a little bit stronger, a little bit more articulate, because you're always going to be able to, because you have to voice and stand up for yourself. And I don't want every trans person to have to go through that. But it is one of the positives of being in that situation, is that you feel like you are kind of growing your skills, you're growing your ability to be able to advocate for other people. Something that's really interesting with transitioning is you go from experiencing the life experiences and like just the hardships of one gender, and then moving over to a whole new set with misogyny and trans misogyny. And it gave me a lot of realizations in myself about how I had some fairly dismissive or misogynistic views living life as a man. And then actually seeing it for myself gave me a whole new perspective, which made me feel even more strongly in my defense of women, but also of people who I don't have those experiences with. So when it comes to, like, I try to do what I can as a white person, but like I'm also going to, one, give space to people who are not white to express their experiences, but I'll also let myself be a way to amplify them if they need it. I'm willing to take on that flag because I know how hard it is to have an experience that other people don't understand.
Well, you are an inspiration to so many people. I absolutely see why you got that award that we started with.
Thank you.
And I'm sure people listening will have had their eyes and ears and hearts opened by your story, and we've got a lot to learn from Lily Guinn, is my takeaway. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. If you did, then please follow or subscribe. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, then you might enjoy this one here, which is also linked in the show notes. Thanks for listening.